Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. We love hearing from our global community, and we might just find a real soldier story from your location too. In the final months of World War II, a young corporal from Colorado was faced with a decision that would haunt him forever. He was standing in a muddy field in Germany, his rifle aimed at a silent prisoner. The order for execution had been given, but as the prisoner lowered his head, the soldier saw something impossible. A small, jagged birthmark on the man's neck. A mark he had seen every day of his childhood. He lowered his weapon and shouted, "Stop!" Today on WW2 Tales, the unbelievable story of the Colorado soldier who recognized his enemy. His name was David Miller, a farm boy from the Rocky Mountains. Like many from Colorado, he was tough, disciplined, and loyal. By 1945, he had seen too much death. His heart had turned to stone. When his unit captured a small group of SS deserters, David didn't feel pity. He only felt the cold weight of his duty. Among the prisoners was a man who refused to speak. He looked older than the others, his eyes filled with a strange, calm resignation. David was assigned to the detail that would carry out the sentence. The war had taught him that orders were absolute and hesitation was a luxury no soldier could afford. The prisoners were lined up, their faces pale against the gray sky. They were just names on a list, numbers to be processed. David checked his rifle one last time, the cold metal a familiar comfort in his hands. He felt nothing. The man with the resigned eyes was just another faceless enemy, another casualty in a war that had already claimed millions. A sergeant gave the signal to prepare. David took his position, his training kicking in, his emotions locked away. He was a soldier, and this was his job. He steadied his aim, focusing on the back of the prisoner's head, just another target in a long line of them. The world narrowed to just him, his rifle, and the man who was about to die. The air was freezing. David watched as the prisoner was led to the wall. At that moment, the man's collar shifted. There, beneath the ear, was a dark, wine-colored birthmark in the shape of a mountain peak. David's breath hitched. His mind raced back to a small cabin in Colorado 20 years earlier. He remembered a man who used to carry him on his shoulders, a man who had the exact same mark. It was his uncle Hans, who had returned to Germany in 1929 and was never heard from again. David realized he wasn't looking at an enemy. He was looking at his own blood. The image of his uncle throwing him into the air, his laughter echoing through the pines, flooded his memory. He remembered the stories Hans would tell, tales of the old country, a family he left behind but promised to see again. The family had assumed he was lost, another victim of the turmoil that gripped Europe. But here he was, seconds from death at the hands of his own nephew. The realization hit David like a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. The stone in his heart cracked. This wasn't a faceless deserter. This was family. This was Uncle Hans. If you are liking this video, please like and subscribe for more. David broke formation. His sergeant screamed at him, but David didn't care. He ran to the prisoner and pulled up his sleeve. There, on the man's wrist, was a tattered leather bracelet from a ranch in Colorado. The prisoner looked up, tears streaming down his face, and whispered, "David, is that you, little mountain hawk?" The execution was halted. An investigation began. It turned out Hans had been forced into service, spending years trying to find a way back to the family he left behind in the States. The chaos was immediate. David's comrades stared in disbelief as he stood between the firing squad and the condemned man. The sergeant, furious at the breach of discipline, grabbed David's arm. But David shook him off, his eyes locked on his uncle's. The leather bracelet was the final proof. It was a gift David had made for him one summer, clumsily woven but given with a child's love. That this man had kept it through years of war, through everything he must have endured, was a miracle. Hans explained later that he had been conscripted into the German army against his will. He was never a supporter of the regime. He was a husband and a father trapped in a nightmare. He had deserted at the first opportunity, hoping to surrender to the Americans and somehow, someday, find his way back home to Colorado. He never imagined that the first friendly face he would see would be the boy he once called his little mountain hawk. After the war, David fought another battle to bring his uncle back to the mountains of Colorado. It took years of paperwork and courage, but in 1952, Hans finally stood again on American soil. David often told his children, "In war, you are taught to see targets. But sometimes, God shows you a face you cannot forget." Kindness survives the battlefield, and a single mark of blood proved stronger than the hate of nations. The journey home for Hans was not easy. He was a former enemy soldier, and the bureaucracy was a fortress. But David was relentless. He wrote letters, made phone calls, and pulled every string he could. He told his uncle's story to anyone who would listen. He argued that the man who taught him to fish and ride a horse was no enemy. He was just a man who had been caught on the wrong side of history. Finally, after 7 long years, the paperwork was approved. The day Hans arrived back in Colorado was a celebration for the entire Miller family. He was older, his face etched with the hardships of war, but his eyes held the same warmth David remembered from his childhood. He had lost his wife and children in a bombing raid, a pain he would carry forever, but in America, with his family, he found a measure of peace. David's act of defiance in that muddy field hadn't just saved a life, it had restored a family. Are you watching from Colorado? Or do you have a family secret from the war? Share your story in the comments. We read every single one. Subscribe to WW2 Tales to keep these memories alive. Until next time.